Hopefully everyone enjoyed their lunch and ready to kind of wrap up the event for this week. So today in this presentation, we're going to be showing the presentation via video because a lot of the folks who have joined are meaningful, but couldn't join us today here in Porto. The topic is going to be around payments in automotive. So I know some of you may have joined the previous topic, which was around in-vehicle payments, but payments in automotive is actually growing as a topic in general as well. So this is payments around other services that may exist in or out of the car, whether it's downloadable content or additional features, subscriptions for the vehicle. A lot of these new digital services that OEMs are looking to create are going to require a strength in payments, a deep understanding in payments. And so we brought a number of different experts from a variety of different areas, whether it's from content, from payment service providers and gateways, to systems integrators, to come have this discussion about what are the challenges, what are the opportunities for building payment services as a capability and as a platform within the infrastructure at an OEM to make becoming that shift from a manufacturer to a mobility company possible. I'm here, you'll see me in the video, but also Olivier is here too, so if there are any questions afterwards, we can also answer any questions as well. Okay? Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our panel here. We're joined by a number of panelists to talk about the growth of payments in automotive. What we're seeing is kind of a growth of now the new payments experiences driven by new consumer behavior, a proliferation of innovation in payments technologies, and the emergence of new digital services within the vehicle. And, auto OEMs are exploring these broad ranges of services to introduce to the vehicle, which include now subscriptions for vehicle services, in-vehicle payments, payment processing for subscriptions, for e-commerce. And so we wanted to explore this topic, and we've brought together here for this panel a number of experts across a variety of other industries to discuss this growth of payments and payments capability. We're joined here today by Mark Gerben, who handles connected car strategy for a major OEM and was formerly with Apple working on Apple Pay. Olivier Bessie, Managing Director of FinTech for Star. Dan Strunk from WorldPay, Senior Enterprise E-commerce Business Development Manager. Joseph Perry from Sony, Director of New Media Distribution. And Mohem Shalabi from Discover, General Manager of Emerging Payments Partnership. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, John.
So what I'd like to do is just dive right in to the first question here. So we're suggesting that there are growing payment needs at the OEM. Is this actually true? Is this something that we're actually seeing?
So maybe Dan, can you
I'd be happy to
take
take
this
on
question?
the first one. Yeah, this is a real easy one. I'm happy to take this one, and Mark can handle the difficult stuff. To answer the question directly, yes. The need for payments in vehicles has grown exponentially, I think, in the last 5 years, right? Kind of during and after the pandemic, we saw the explosion of, curbside pickup, parking, fuel tolls. I mean, there's just a bigger emphasis, I think, today on the needs for payments in vehicles. I'll kick it over to Mark.
Oh, lucky me. So I'll make a very quick disclaimer that everything I say here is flat out my personal opinion, has nothing to do with my employer, all that good stuff. So to get into it, actually, I would easily say yes. Payments obviously is taking a much more significant role, as we've seen with a variety of different services. So for example, we've seen last year with BMW, with them wanting to launch now a subscription service for heated seats, and then other types of services we've seen with other OEMs that are starting to come. I think another piece that hasn't been spoken as much, at least in the US side, but more so on the European side, is authentication. So there's also a lot of stuff there with regards to customer authentication, identification at that point as well, so that you really have you're meeting those PSD2 requirements, which has its own plethora of rules, you could say. But that adds a significant, let's say, layer to the user experience that you have to consider in a vehicle, right? So.
Great. And I think, some of these things where, paying for heated seats is really more of a test, right? To potentially see what customer acceptance is like. And, what are some of the other factors that are contributing to the increase of this payments? Are there these services or content? Maybe something, Joseph, you could weigh in on. Are you seeing kind of increased interest in content services within the vehicle?
Yeah, specifically as it relates to content services, there's several factors that I think are driving and contributing to the need for payment services. As you mentioned, there is definitely the need for entertainment. But there's other things. There's data plans, there's service bundles, there's other types of driving services such as traffic alerts and traffic subscriptions. And all of those are being powered, I think, by two things: EV adoption, and I think higher technologies that are also being contributed to the growing need for data services inside the vehicle as well.
Great. Mark, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree in general, because there's basically a plethora of different things that can be offered. So in-vehicle entertainment is kind of a no-brainer. Kind of get some inspiration from other industries and travel. You can take a look at the airline industry, how they kind of tried to crack that nut for a little while with having in-flight entertainment. And you still have some types of charging that does occur there, where you kind of have it as like a standard now. But yeah, I agree that I think for those specific models makes total sense. I would get into some parts like with the experimenting piece. So you're taking a look at a lot of the companies that are like, oh, let me charge X amount per year for a little bit more engine power or whatever it might be. And some of this doesn't really make sense. I'll literally sit there and go, you have a subscription model that does fit certain scenarios. So if I'm talking about leasing, if I'm talking about something like this, I would do something like that there. But it doesn't make sense that if I buy a vehicle and I have it and I'm put on a subscription model, I don't know where some of these people are getting this pricing from, but I think the industry has a lot of work to do with regards to how they should package things and how they should think about things. Quite simply because when you think about ownership, that's basically what a person thinks they have, and then they're having something tied to something that's really physical that should be working all the time, and all of a sudden someone has the right to turn it on and off. It doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, and we kind of want these features and the subscription to really be more driving that loyalty, driving the profitability, investing in these systems to really kind of continue to have the customer base want to return, not drive the customer away. Olivier, can you talk a bit more about, how you can actually use payments, for profitability and customer loyalty?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think that's there's multiple ways really in which I guess OEMs and others can leverage payments to drive their own objectives as well. I mean, I think the first area, which is probably the most obvious, is the simple user experience, and that's probably the starting point for most, where you're going to provide like essentially in-car payments, the capability in the car, so with all the the ease of use that comes with it, so that of course that improved UX is going to reflect well ultimately on your brand and kind of provide delightful experience, and therefore should hopefully result in additional loyalty. But I think it goes beyond that. I mean, one particular area, for example, is it's going to be an enabler for other services, and I think we've touched upon that in terms of subscription services. I agree that I think certainly there's some progress to be made in terms of identifying which are the right use cases, but certainly things like entertainments, etc., seem like the right area to look at. I think it's also potentially a way of growing revenue by itself. So in particular, some of the players in the industry are looking into, or have already done so, issuing cards. So in that case, for example, if you issue cards that you can use to pay for EV charging, for petrol, for other services, then you will generate interchange revenue for yourself as the issuer. You will generate potentially some additional revenue via let's say your affiliates network that you may work with, and then of course you're going to generate data, which is something that you're going to be able to leverage in the future to better know your customers. And finally, I would say that the last area, I think, is probably slightly more indirect, but it's also a way for OEMs, I think, to help their dealership network, and obviously by helping them, they're helping themselves by essentially giving them better solutions for acquiring services, things like marketplace or e-commerce, and essentially kind of a way to give you relevance to the dealership.
Great. And are you? Can we talk about what services you are seeing as being successful, and financial fintech type services that are being successful now? We've talked about different services. We always talk about parking. We always talk about these other, but what are these areas that we're really beginning to see traction? I know Mercedes, for example, has launched Mercedes Pay. Joseph, you're looking at digital services for OEMs. Are we starting to see success across some of these digital services?
Mark, would you like to go first?
I can, unless, well, either way, I can go with really a really basic starting answer that the industry is starting to see traction, for sure. Traction for me means that, compared to a few years ago, there was zero. Now there's something. Something I won't mention because those kind of things are a little bit confidential, but let's just say that I think that's starting to take some form. I think part of the issue is that the user interfaces and experiences were flat out horrendous prior. They really had like multiple steps, registration on 15 different devices, jumping in and out, like none of that made sense. Now we're starting to see a lot more of a mature market where you have bigger screens, you have more things that you could actually use and interact with. So it's not like you're programming for remember the phones we had years ago where the screen was like this big. You now have something that's much more significant. And this means that you can have completely different experiences that start to actually be customer friendly. And so when I take those aspects in, I would take a look at really the vehicle basics, things that actually make sense that are very vehicle specific. So we're taking a look at fueling, parking, can take a look at charging, car washing, for example, anything that's just 100%, this is what a vehicle does, right? Those are the kind of services that I would be looking at and starting with versus, I think other aspects as well, like we're taking a look at, in general, what I'm saying there is more like with charging, for example, you have these long wait times. So I think entertainment is going to have a huge push in a few years when the industry starts going up in this way. So that's a good springboard. Maybe Joseph, maybe you can talk a little bit on that side for you.
Yeah, so I think a couple things are happening. So I agree with everything Mark is saying in the fact that up until recently, there wasn't a real case or a logic for consumers to want to pay inside their vehicle. So to that point, that there has to be value for the consumers to want to make transactions in the vehicle. And that has driven the adoption or the need to have payment services with good user experiences. Some of the things that we haven't really talked about, like data plans. So for example, ADAS requires data. And up to this point, OEMs have been ultimately covering the cost for all those types of services. But those services are expensive and they're continuing to grow. And as we bring in more technologies into the vehicle, such as being able to have immersive entertainment experiences, then the costs are going to continue to go up and more data is going to be required to be used inside the vehicle. So there has to be a way for consumers to pay for that. And there's three things I always say. It has to be easy for engagement, easy for the consumer. You have to make it safe, and then you have to make it fun. I think those three things are the things that we're working towards. And we're not there yet. Right now, to Mark's point, we're at just doesn't work. Can you actually make the transaction work? And I think the next level is it's got to be the right services that make sense, and it's got to be easy for them to do that. And then we'll get to the point where it's fun.
Yeah. Sometimes easy is in conflict with safety and fun, and so balancing those three things in automotive can be tricky. But I do think the platforms in the vehicle or what you're starting with is truly making it easy, as Mark said, and hopefully we can get to fun quickly and always safe. So what are some of the challenges, Mulham? Maybe we can turn to you real quick here. What are some of the challenges that the OEM might face when kind of implementing new payment solutions for customers? I mean, you're Discover works, with customers every day. What are some of your thoughts on, how these new payment solutions could be made easier for customers? Oh, Mulham, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. To your point, I think there's a lot of challenges that not just OEMs, I think anyone in the payment space faces when exploring new payment solutions. And for me, the number one thing is customer adoption. Being able to, launching a new payment solution, but then getting the consumer to use that solution is key. So we know today consumers are already using payment methods that work for them today, whether that be traditional payments to wallets or different things regarding that. So really understanding your customers' needs and having parity across the card brands, offering different digital payment and mobile wallet solutions to really offer that robust payment offering to the consumers is one way. I also want to talk about just a few trends that we're seeing in the space today. I'll touch briefly on them. I mentioned mobile wallets. I think mobile wallets, as we know, they're becoming more and more popular, and different reasons for that. There's trends, I think, from the pandemic that have caused folks to use more digital and mobile wallets and making it easier from that angle. But in general, it's just easier sometimes to use a mobile wallet versus going directly to purchase something online. And consumers are using these different methods today to purchase car-centric products. So, as we know, the payment industry has seen a consumer shift to digital wallets and a significant uptick since the pandemic. And a study we did with 451 Research shows that digital payments are expected to account for more than 10 trillion in global transactions between in-store and e-commerce by 2025. So we know the consumer buying habits continue to shift. So being able to understand your customer and helping them along the customer journey by offering different payment options at various points of that journey is valuable. And we continue to see this trend continue as more consumers are demanding a frictionless experience for their shopping needs. I'll just touch briefly on a couple other things. I mentioned flexible payment options. Being able to create a strong customer journey and loyalty is really a solid way to provide that customer experience by meeting demands of the customer and creating more digital experience, like I mentioned, making the consumer experience seamless at the end of the day can really help drive some of those customer adoption for new products. One thing that as I think of from just thinking about in-car payments and how to drive more adoption to that, as in-car, looking as the vehicle as a payment terminal, loyalty programs and reward programs can be ways that have been used in other verticals that can be something that could be implemented in the automotive space potentially to drive customer adoption, because loyalty programs and rewards tend to retain customers and really get their consumer interest and capture their spend as well. So that could be a potential way to think about when it comes to trying to get adoption in new payment methods. And the other thing is like embedded finance solutions. We're seeing new ways that merchants can offer new payment experiences through different platforms that go beyond the traditional platforms that we know of today. So for example, in-car payments, even social media, being able to understand the voice of the customer, understand your customer journey and their needs can be a really great way to help drive that adoption, and offering flexible payments. So for example, we're seeing buy now, pay later is continuing to be in high demand, offerings a consumer who may not have made a purchase for whatever reason, using an option as buy now, pay later to make that purchase. And we're seeing that grow into different retail categories, including automotive from a parts and services standpoint, and definitely can see that continuing to expand in the automotive space. So to summarize it, I think as OEMs look to add new payment solutions, understanding the latest trends and payment solutions to help address the biggest challenge is customer adoption. I think that can help with that.
Thanks, Malham. Dan, do you want to add to that a bit in terms of what are those challenges?
Right. I feel like Malham just absolutely crushed that. So I'll try to follow that. But there are a few things, challenges that exist, like connectivity, coverage, and reliability, right? From a nation perspective or a global perspective, right? For example, in autonomous driving, you don't want the system, or you don't want the connectivity to fail in a situation where the car is driving you. Some other things that to keep in mind too, regulatory guidelines and how they vary as well. The subscription payment complexities because the app is on the dashboard doesn't necessarily mean the OEM will be the merchant of record, right? So understanding who would be settling those transactions and who would be then responsible for, that transaction data and things, along with, cybersecurity and consumer, privacy. A lot of those things you have to think of as well as you're implementing new payment solutions, especially for the OEM. So.
And Dan, so how can OEMs partner with like a financial services company like yours?
Reach out to me. I'll send everyone my contact information. I'd be happy to. No, in all honesty, it starts with having that conversation, looking at what, whether a merchant acquirer, like WorldPay can do, what we have available today, but then also creating those partnerships so we connect, the right solutions, with the right OEM and those kind of things. So I would say stressing, partnerships would be the biggest thing. Reach out to, I'm sure every bank relationship has a merchant acquiring relationship that you could, reach out to and start that conversation to understand what's available today, but then what can be partnered together to develop for those solutions for the future.
Right. And maybe we should turn a little bit towards security and security of those payment transactions. Olivia, what are some considerations they need to make, or how might this service might be different than just a traditional digital service if OEMs need to make customers pay for them? Maybe can you give us an overview of some considerations around this securing of those payment transactions, and what steps that OEMs should be thinking about?
Of course, I mean, obviously the cards and payments industry is governed by standards called PCI DSS, which I won't inflict the details of you on, but I'm not sure. Maybe Dan will. But essentially the core of it, I would say, is largely around how you handle essentially card details, such as the 16 digits card numbers, then the other details of the card. I think the core of it is that you want as much as possible not to handle and certainly not to store the card details. And I think Mulham mentioned I guess the growing importance of mobile wallets, and this is really at the core what mobile wallets are enabling you to do. So they're essentially enabling you to pay using a card, but without storing or handing over your card number. So I think there's obviously various technologies behind that. I mean, clearly the ones initiated by Google and Apple for their own presents some differences, but they're essentially based on either, for example, tokenization of the card number or some other, if you like, encryption method. So typically, I would say an in-car payment solution would involve some level of the tokenization to avoid storing the card number. Obviously, you don't want to become, let's say, an organization that stores all of your customers' card numbers. There are, for example, for things like subscription services, there are dedicated third parties who do things like card vaulting. Again, so that's something that you typically want to outsource to a third party and not necessarily handle yourself as an OEM. And I would say finally the third layer is how do you manage access to, for example, authorize a payment. So here you have more, I would say, biometrics focused solutions. So that this could be, it could be face recognition, it could be fingerprints. So I think various providers have kind of made various technical choice, but I would say that's kind of the last layer on the cake is that kind of biometric access. How do you authorize access to the payments? I don't know if Dan, you want to add some detail as well from your perspective.
The only thing that I would add is exactly partnering with those third-party like fraud tools, for machine learning or the AI security monitoring that they have, just from a fraudulent transaction perspective, that can help as an additional layer as well. But no, Olivia, you really took it home. I don't want to bore everyone with PCI questions.
Great. And as OEMs begin to focus on payments, what are some of the other strategies that we should think about? Mulham, maybe you can address this. Just the strategies around the go-to-market complexity. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different strategies and complexity, but I'll touch base just on a couple really quick. So we know as we look across the board in different verticals, we're seeing a variety of approaches to including payments, and there's no right answer. There's different approaches that OEMs can take, but one approach that can allow an OEM to move more quicker and more efficiently could be potentially through like the payment facilitator model. So one approach we've seen that we see more frequently that partners are opting to look at is the payment facilitator, also known as the merchant of record, is becoming more and more popular. Prior to payment facilitators being around, it was necessary for a merchant to connect directly to an acquirer. But with payment facilitators today, businesses can onboard onto their platform, and then the payment facilitator, merchant of record, acts as the go-between connecting into the payment processor directly. So newer technology and software providers are continuing to add more payments to their solutions, and just in new and exciting ways. And companies have found that they can scale faster by implementing payments on more platforms. And in a multitude of verticals, we're seeing some people moving to the payment facilitator model And some reasons is, ease of signing of partners, doing it from a cost perspective or scalability perspective. But what makes the solutions really intriguing is having more control of the experience for your customer and providing a simplified payment experience. As I had mentioned before, and I think we've touched base on it, the value of the consumer journey continues to evolve. And having the ability as a consumer to make a payment using whatever payment method of choice, but then throughout the process, whether it might be in a store, on a mobile app, online, e-com, or even in your car, and to different approaches from there, being able to help control that and solve for that is key. And we're starting to see some of these trends come into the automotive industry, being adopted in the difference from dealerships to in-car payments, e-com, parts and services, proximity, wallets, subscription services, mobile apps, and more. And I think Mark had mentioned on subscription services, one thing that we're seeing more and more, and even the auto manufacturers are starting to do, is launching rentals. Subscription services where you can rent a vehicle for a month or a week. To sometimes maybe your lease might be up and you're in between buying a car, whatever the reason may be. But you're seeing more products and more services being introduced in the automotive space. And Mark also talked about the new payments from proximities and being able to add more merchant verticals into the vehicle. I think it's the customer journey is just evolving, and being able to solve for that is critical. And then really just want to touch base on one other strategy. I think partnerships. We're all on here today, just having this great conversation talking about payments in automotive, and we know in the automotive industry. The automotive industry, they're the expert in automotives, and payments are experts in payments. And if we can bring that together and have more collaboration and work closely together, I think that's critical in solving like-minded goals, as well as, most importantly, for our consumers.
Thanks, Mohan. Mark, Joseph, what do you think about the go-to-market complexity, and is that improving anytime soon?
So yeah, I actually think it is improving. I think that with each new model and each new update and each new release that comes out with a vehicle manufacturer, you're seeing more capabilities that allow for these kind of great experiences. It's great for people like me. I'm a content producer. We make movies, we make TV shows. And one of the things that we have to think about is when we launch services that are going to be bringing content inside the vehicle, we have to think about, first of all, how do we launch it without having transacting capabilities? But then what comes after that? And so the runway to be able to get that is there now. We can see it now. I think the manufacturers are thinking about it from a global perspective, how they can make that operate. And so I think all these things are timing, are occurring right at the right time. And I do think we're going to get there. But I agree with the idea of partnerships, that all of us hold a piece of information that we're experts in our particular space. And bringing all of that together to the table allows us to come with really good solutions.
Great. Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, there's one part that no one really thought about, I think. And it more or less comes to the point that, the automotive side is one thing, the customer is another. Those are two entry. You have basically a technical piece over on the OEM side. You have a customer acquisition piece on the wallet side, if we're talking about wallets, right? And then we're talking about the content provider side, who has to do the work to bring their content into the vehicle. And one of the biggest problems I see quite frequently is that, especially with payment work, that all the payment rails and everything have to be completely redone with wallet scenarios. So that basically means that each time, if I want to have some content that just basically would plug in, that's great. But then, there's a question of who's merchant of record, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. And that creates so much more work. And a content provider's perspective is to reach as many users as possible. So it's super easy from a phone perspective, because a phone has billions of users. You've got Android and you've got the App Store, right? So from those 2 points, that's super easy to reach. But when you get to automotive, if I'm taking a look at the resources, what's the bigger business case? It's obviously not automotive, at least for a lot of content, because it's in the end, for an OEM, they have maybe a few million customers, and literally in comparison to billions or hundreds of millions from other scenarios. And that, from at least a content point of view, is not enough exposure. So I think like a lot of the business models and also the prioritization for the resources to get stuff done just doesn't really happen like across the entire board nearly as fast as you would have in mobile. So I think that that's a huge part that, at least to this point, to this day, there's very few scenarios or solutions, even stuff that can scale up much quicker than I'd say traditional methods, still can't address as well as they could. Right? So.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing automotive platforms like Android Automotive and what BlackBerry is doing with Ivy, making things a bit more common across OEMs, which hopefully will help with that scale, but and hopefully help with the security and privacy. So to a certain degree, there's this balance that needs to be taken. Are we taking too big of a hammer to the security and privacy aspects? I mean, now there's going to be transaction data that the OEM now will be potentially having to manage. What is that balance between security and privacy and convenience and accessibility of these services? Like, what is that right mix? Is that something that OEMs really need to kind of be worried about, or are they moving too slowly? I mean, is this, Mark, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from the get-go, it really depends on the OEM, because some OEMs have much, let's say, more relaxed policies than others, for sure, when it comes to data protection or consumer data. Because if you're talking about, let's say, let's start with the high-end premium models, right? It's really affluent individuals. They prefer their privacy. They don't want to be tracked, that kind of stuff. And in that sense, you have to have proper constructs which make sense for that demographic, right? Because they've paid let's say, a very high premium to have that premium vehicle. On the other side, you have lower end models that are for, could be for the kid that just got out of high school or who knows what, right? Something really, really low cost. And those companies have to think a bit more outside of how can they actually generate revenues based on the fact that they have very, very little to get go, because like they're there to produce a vehicle. It has very little margins, so they're depending on massive volumes of sales. And if they don't get those volumes, they got to get their revenues elsewhere. So I think from that perspective, that's the first major piece that has to be considered. Thereafter, it really just depends upon the demographics. So I think the demographic of each individual group is going to define what kind of services you're going to offer. So let's take a look at the budget car. If it doesn't have a big screen and it doesn't have a lot of other stuff, I might want to use a bigger focus on Android Auto or CarPlay, because it'll have a better overall consistent user experience in a small scenario. But if I have a luxury vehicle scenario, which has massive screens, I have everything everywhere, well, all of a sudden my engagements points completely change. And I go, well, why do I want to put all of my stuff in a small little box? Or even if it's, if it's changed a little bit more later, that control for that experience is standardized. And standardized basically means that that's not luxury. So if people are not getting a luxury kind of scenario, or they don't have like a premium experience, that doesn't fit that target group. So I think that's a really big area that needs to be kind of like thought about, because sometimes standardization, yes, helps with scale, but you have to also look at standardization that still has a high level of customization, so it still fits like the look and feel of the product.
Yeah. I mean, this is something which I think across OEMs is actually coming in from bottom up rather than a kind of real kind of platform view. Any thoughts on that technical strategy or that approach? I mean, is it really something that OEMs, because they're just trying to sort things out, should they be creating individual services across different groups, or should they really start thinking about this as an overall strategic platform for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that kind of dovetails a bit. So sorry if I hog the time here, but I think it has to do a bit with the fact that the data itself creates personalization. So it's a question of how you use that information to create like the different cohorts and your ecosystem within your ecosystem. So you have like different segmented aspects. So for example, if I know that I have a large majority of children who sit in the back seat, and I'm delivering content in the back seat, I can use that data to deliver content. So I think, Joseph, maybe from your side, you'd probably be able to confirm that if you have certain types of information, you're able to confirm certain types of content delivery. Would you say that you've seen that also in other lines of business?
Yeah, absolutely. You can identify from profile segmentation and consumer attributes based on the type of content they're watching, how long they're watching it, what they watch trailers for, what they don't buy and transact. We can build all kinds of information about a consumer based on that level of engagement and activity. So it does help to fuel customizing and personalizing those experiences within a vehicle, as well as the recommendations and the searches and what is displayed and exposed to each individual user.
Great. Well, we're coming up a bit on time here, so I wanted to thank everyone. But before we leave, any last bit of advice that you would would want to tell an OEM who's starting to kind of really consider payments and how that might differentiate and increase profits for them? Joseph?
So, I think one of the things that I always mention is that you do have to start right now. What are your immediate needs right now? But I think it's very important that manufacturers, as well as all of us that support the industry in our various capacities, think, what does that midterm roadmap look like? Because that will really drive how you develop and shape and some of these technology strategies that we've been discussing. All of that becomes very important in terms of where you want to be, how soon you want to be there, and what are going to be the different methods and types of currencies and all those types of things, especially when it comes to payments that you want to have. And then lastly, thinking about your user experience across all these different models, everything from the starter car to the premium car. So those types of things are very important and will allow you to create those solutions. But you have to think about it in contextual discussions with all those different pieces and not just do it in silos or in one particular box.
Great, thank you. Dan, how about you?
Absolutely, I would ring that same bell as Joseph said of partnerships, reaching out, creating that collaboration between those financial services partners, the OEMs or the technology providers as well, because it's going to literally take a village to get this thing done and get it over the line in a big way. As Mark touched on, from like the user perspective, much smaller user base when you think of automobiles versus phones, but phones had a much smaller user base 20 years ago as well. So you think about that kind of 20 years into the future, and I absolutely see kind of the adaptations that happen to the smartphone for a payment wallet perspective being able to be implemented into the kind of the car dash of the future. So reach out, partner, however we can kind of continue the conversation, I think is the best thing we can all do.
Great, thanks, Dan. Mark?
Yeah,
thoughts?
One of the main pieces I think I'd offer as advice for most OEMs is that they need to get like a lot more specific on their payment specialists. Like they don't have a head of payments at a lot of these companies. Most people go, who is doing what and why? And I feel quite often I see just a huge lack of expertise. Like I think it's an understatement when I literally say that, but a huge lack of expertise in payments, and that basically means that a lot of the strategies are literally, oh, what are the other guys doing? Let me see what they're doing across the street and get that information. Oh, they're using this provider. Oh, that's what I've got to do because it might make sense, and it literally doesn't. So most of the time, I think we really have to look at if there's going to be a massive improvement and a huge change on that side, they need to have really a lot more people who know what they're doing in the space, because you have literally people who come from production to running digital operations and then getting into payments and going, oh, it's no problem, I'll put someone on there. And they have no idea. No idea, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think everyone in here could probably laugh about it because it's so true. You see, like the level of discussion you have, you cannot get into the depth you need to have, let alone when we start talking about authentication and all this other good PSC2 stuff, just becomes a nightmare. MPCI, right? So that's the fun little. Yeah.
I guess there's the piece that there is an operating part of this business, not just the integration of an API to make payments work, and having that understanding that there's a whole operational aspect that needs to be considered, and ongoing maintenance and PCI and security and all of that. So yeah, that's that experience that's likely missing.
Exactly.
Thanks, Olivier.
No, I think obviously I'm going to concur with everything that's been said so far. I would simply add, I mean, very clearly, very important to have a strategy as to what you want to achieve in payments. So I think whether it's largely driven by improving the user experience for your users, or whether it's to drive potentially incremental revenue, have partnerships, have more data. So I think it's important to nail down the objectives, and then I think in terms of actually product, I think it's important to, I'm going to put my kind of a product manager hat on. It's important to keep it simple. So it's essentially when launching the first product, to not necessarily try to tick all the different boxes. Maybe focused on a few key use cases which are very important to your users, to the consumers, and do them as well as you can. And essentially that enables you to have probably a much, I guess, a simpler and cleaner AI, rather than try to do everything under the sun, and end up with something that's potentially over engineered, and then you can address the additional use cases later, essentially iterate and handle it that way, I would say. Great, thank you. And Mulham?
Yeah, what everybody just said. I think I'll just leave with this. Yeah, everyone made some great points, and it really comes down to partnerships and collaboration, and have exploratory conversations with companies that you may have not thought in the past. And one thing that I really love about working at Discover is we're very nimble and easy to work with, and would love to have more and more partnerships and opportunities to talk with different automotive partners in the space. So yeah, just really building on those partnerships, and it's the best way to learn about each other and ways we can solve for solutions. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining the video, the panel, and recording this video. And we hope that it was an interesting discussion for everyone. And if there are questions from the audience, we am happy to route those questions to the panelists afterwards and connect you. I think everyone's here kind of open to meeting new partners. So thanks everyone.